Good evening and thanks for tuning in to Undercurrent, Perth's only local current affairs show. We're really happy to have you with us this evening and we're looking forward to bringing you the stories that affect you. Tonight, we've got another great show lined up for you and we're coming to you from beautiful Cottesloe. WA's steel industry is currently under threat from overseas manufacturers. Journalist Rachel O'Rourke spoke to Australian Steel Institute State Manager James England about the impact of the big companies sending their orders overseas.
The Australian Steel Institute State Manager James England says the government needs to change their attitude and accept it's part of their job to monitor the industry.
At the moment, they seem to have gone to sleep. It comes and goes with governments. Sometimes they try a little bit and then they lose interest and move on to something else. This needs to be hardwired into what the government does all day, every day to make sure that West Australians get what they deserve from these resources projects.
Well, WA Labor's policy is related to taking the whole industry, the whole business of Western Australia seriously. And our policy is to actually make sure, as an opposition, that we keep the government held to account to make sure that they are developing a sustainable economy for Western Australia, not just in this boom, but in the boom after the next.
Many professionals in the steel fabrication business are worried about the industry and where it's headed, with many of the local factories running at less than 35% of local workers.
Local content policies in the past have been pretty much just words on paper. They need to be backed up by proper ways of measuring local content so that everybody knows what's happening in the state, so that everybody can see how much work is actually being done here and how much is being done offshore.
Well, principally, it's not the fact that the workshops aren't full, which is clearly what the Premier had promised, but what it also is the fact that the forward orders are not as healthy as they look. So the trend line for these businesses, the trend line is down on future orders, and that's a really worrying sign.
Well, every other country that's got massive amounts of resources, like Western Australia has, they really look after their local industries and they make it a condition of doing business that the local people get a benefit, not in terms of royalties, but in terms of jobs and skills and investment opportunities.
Worries about what could happen to the industry in the next decade include that of a skill shortage in the WA steel sector and multinational companies taking most of the profit out of WA.
Well, what's actually at stake is twofold. One is we're going to dumb down the skills base of this state. Our capacity to undertake the higher end work will actually decline over time. That will reduce the level of work that our industry can undertake and become a strategic weakness for us to be able to deliver a sustainable economic future.
Certainly the government's working towards building the skills requirements, but unfortunately they're working against it at the same time by approving too many projects at once. The companies that come to this state to do these projects are multinational companies. They're not West Australian businesses. It's in their interest to look after their bottom line and they play by the rules according to their interpretation of them. It's up to our government to make sure that those rules benefit the people of Western Australia, not the multinational companies.
Well, it's harder and harder to get a job, to be honest. Yeah. I've had about 7 jobs in 15 years, but each time it was quite hard to get another job.
Eastern states should be second on the list and then overseas people should come after that. But for me, it's just disappointing that all our good work goes overseas. You find a lot of stuff comes from overseas, gets here, doesn't come up to scratch. You've got to pull it all apart and do it again.
Oh, I reckon they should have a steel mill in Australia, produce steel, especially in WA, instead of sending our minerals overseas. And like we have to buy our steel back. We lose a lot of jobs doing that for starters. So.
We are at the cutting edge. A lot of the workshops in the southern suburbs of WA are very high tech. Those are the ways that we are competing right now. We've got a world-class industry. It's up to our government to make sure that continues.
Oh, I'd like to see it keep on going. Like apprenticeships are getting more and more scarce, so I'd like to see government offer more apprenticeships in this industry.
Over the next few episodes, we'll be bringing you a number of interviews with Perth politicians and academics discussing corporate responsibility. Tonight, Joe speaks to Roger Cook, Deputy Leader of the ALP Party and member for Kwinana, about native title and corporate responsibility and how it relates to people today.
I believe that you've got an interest with native title and therefore have quite a strong opinion where this is concerned.
Look, my formative experiences in relation to corporate social responsibility was working for Aboriginal land councils who are involved in native title and helping them negotiate positions and outcomes with mining companies who wanted to mine on their lands. So a real key outcome is how those mining companies actually conducted themselves to produce outcomes which benefited the Aboriginal community and respected their culture.
What about big industry throwing around their weight and particularly stakeholders at the top concerned about bottom value?
Well, that's the interesting thing about corporate social responsibility. It impacts on big players and small players alike. And it's by people being actively engaged in the marketplace and in the activities of business which puts pressure upon businesses to conduct themselves in an appropriate manner. So what we actually see in some cases is big businesses who have the resources actually do manage to conduct themselves in a manner which is, in my experience, sensitive to the needs of native title holders.
How can an ordinary member of the public track the progress of initiatives in place?
Well, and that's what the role of non-government organisation and pressure groups, and that's the important role that they play. By people on an ongoing basis taking note of how these companies are conducting themselves, informing the community and allowing people therefore to hold those companies to account is really what corporate social responsibility hinges on.
And can you give an example of a company that has been under recent scrutiny and how they've handled it?
Well, the classic example is the response from Nike when it was brought to the community's attention about their work practices at their factories in Asia. You saw a movement back in North America and other developed countries which put pressure on that company to change its business activities and its business decisions in a way which produced a different social outcome. So here you have a company that's having to respond to someone other than its corporate supervisors like government and other forms of accountability, having to respond to a group other than just its customers, but actually responding to a broader group of stakeholders who have a view about how they operate.
Do you think that there's enough education and awareness around corporate social responsibility?
Well, there's much more than there used to be. There's more than there was yesterday, and there'll be more tomorrow. And that's the nature of corporate social responsibility. It's because companies now operate under the glare of public scrutiny through modern communication, through modern social movements, that they're actually being held to account. For instance, many years ago, a Japanese boat operating in the wide oceans hunting whales would not have had a single point of scrutiny in terms of their activities. Now, it's worldwide media focused, and that's the nature of the new age of communication, and that's why companies now have to operate in an international environment.
This week, Nick Hayes sat down with the Global Good Foundation founder Tenille Bentley to chat to her about her work with children affected by domestic violence.
What is the Global Good Foundation doing to help those that are suffering from domestic violence?
We've got a number of things that we're doing at the moment. The core, I suppose, business goal to the Global Good Foundation is that we want to set up an education centre, firstly in WA and then around Australia, for people impacted by domestic violence. We also want to be able to provide entrepreneurial opportunities at the tail end of that, and also work placement opportunities at the tail end of our program. We take them away for a 60-day program. We educate them on very deep behavioural based methods, education on why they got in the situation they did in the first place, how that happened and what does it mean for them, and how can we now change their situation. We then sort of rebuild those building blocks, and then they have two options. They can either go back into the workforce, where we will, through planning and processing and matching them up with the right mentor programs, we would put placement back into the workforce, or they could go into our entrepreneur centre and then look to start their own business with micro-lending and also support with a business coach and a life coach. And also with some of our national scholarship programs, we are really testing how they shift from being, in their mind, a victim to being empowered. How do we do that in the quickest way possible?
Why do you think the media doesn't cover domestic violence as much as it should?
It's a funny thing. It's because they don't want to polarise the situation. A bit like the suicide, you know, they don't want to polarise it. But in some ways, I think it goes against it. I mean, I know again firsthand that I've been told by some media people that I've had interviews with before in the past, is that they won't, even if domestic violence comes across their table, they will not look at it.
Is domestic violence as rife through Western Australia as it is around the rest of the country and around the world?
On average, about 50% of people in our community are impacted by domestic violence, and that's proving to be, you know, a result of the community not speaking about it enough. It's not supported enough, so it's really something that we need to sort of get together and really educate our community about.
50%. I mean, they're big numbers.
Big numbers, yeah.
Why isn't the media covering more of this issue?
Fear of loss, fear of financial loss, shame. There's a lot of behavioural reasons why it's not getting spoken about. I mean, people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to screw up their family. They don't want to, I suppose, dishonour their family. So it's deeper than just, talking about it. It's actually, for people to talk about it is a really big deal.
Tenille, let's get on to something a little different. You are the CEO and MD of Socialite Media. Tell us a little bit more about it.
At Socialite Media, we're positioning ourselves to be Australia's leading social media solutions provider. So by way of providing a social media personal assistant to organisations that just don't have time to do social media.
You've been an inspiration. What do you love about Western Australia?
Well, there's many things I love about Western Australia, but I suppose one of the big things that stand out is the community aspect, the people, the support, that small business supports small business. The support amongst women as well, I think, is really important in WA. I think we've got this camaraderie between, women who are starting up business, and I would not have been able to do it without that kind of camaraderie and support and just positivity. So, yeah, it's great.
Good
Love it.
Thanks, Tenille.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick and Tenille. We're going to have a quick break now. Stay where you are. We'll be right back with more Undercurrent.